Okay, so good Yom Tov everyone, it's Chav Kislev, and in the words of the Rebbe Rashab, Chav Kislev is the same as Yud Tes Kislev, and maybe if Rabbi Itzinger has some time, he might even tell us why. But Rabbi Itzinger is an expert on the history of Yud Tes Kislev, specifically as they pertain to some of the relatively new documents that were discovered after the fall of the Iron Curtain, and therefore it's my honor and privilege to have Rabbi Itzinger address us. And without further ado, the floor is yours, Mendy.
So first of all, I understand that we've gone through the introductions, and I don't want to waste. We only have an hour. I don't want to waste much time, but to tell you, the honor is mine. First of all, I was in Beis Menachem. I spoke in Beis Menachem community before Rabbi Rapport even thought about it. I was a bacher. I was learned in Chicago as a bacher, and I was there. But also, it's a big honor for me to be able to be in the presence of Rabbi Rapport. I'm a big fan of him and his, and already I'm a second generation fan of the Rappaports because I'm a big fan of his father as well. And his father and my father go back many years too. But I don't want to waste the time. What I want to go through today, what I figured we would go through today, is there are some times where you learn something and you see some document or you see something and everything clicks in place. And everything you knew until then suddenly falls into place. So when I saw this document from the Alter Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe puts the entire Chassidus, what Chassidus is, the Alter Rebbe puts it all into one word. And we'll get to what that word is. The whole Chassidus came to achieve one thing. The way we got the document was very simply after the fall of the Soviet Union. So through a freedom of information, they were able to get, in the time of the Tsar, there was no such thing as freedom of information, and obviously not by communists either. So, but after the fall of the Soviet Union, the historians were able to go into the archives, and there was a historian who was recently passed away by the name of Rabbi Yeshua Munshine. He found the entire archive, all the documents of the entire arrest of the Alter Rebbe. It's a trove of probably 30, 40 documents, letters back and forth between the Tsar, between the chief interrogator, between local authorities. So if we could go through that document, but start from somewhere maybe perhaps a little bit different. I'm just going to share the screen if that's okay. I hope you can see. We'll highlight. Make a no, can't highlight. I'm not sure why. Okay, but spotlight. There we go. Okay. So really, what I'd like to begin is as follows. You have the system. I'm going to just to give a little bit of an introduction of what's going on in Russia at the time, and thereby to once we know what's going on in Russia, we can try and put this into context. There was the Hasidic community didn't begin in Russia. There were actually in the 1700s there weren't many Jews in Russia. The Jews lived in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Just for those that those that don't know the history, there was two countries, Poland and Lithuania. At some point, the king of Poland was actually a queen. They called him the king at the time, but the queen of Poland married the king of Lithuania, or vice versa. I believe it was the queen of Poland married the king of Lithuania. It became one country. This is in the 1500s. It became a very strong country, the Commonwealth of Poland and Lithuania, and that's where the Jews lived. Poland was one of the only countries that had freedom of religion, that encouraged Jewish movement over there. And when the Jews when the Jews were banished from many countries, they ended up over there. Towards the beginning of the 1700s, in the 1720s, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth began to fall apart. There was internal strife, there was internal struggle, they were fighting. And due to internal political matters, the whole Commonwealth weakened. And by the 1760s, earlier even by the 1740s and 1750s, the Russians had installed a puppet king. So though Poland-Lithuania was one country was still an independent country. It was more or less a puppet of the Russian regime. If anybody has any questions, you can ask me obviously at any time. This continued until the 1790s. In 1795, the whole Polish government fell away. There was no more Polish government, and the Polish-Lithuanian country ceased to exist, and it was swallowed up by a part of it by the Ottoman Empire on one side, the bulk of it by Russia on the other side. Russia suddenly has a new problem, and it's the Jewish problem. Russia suddenly has to deal with not only new land where they need to enforce their rule, they need to rule over people that they almost never existed, that they almost never had in their country. And this is where we find the Russians suddenly getting involved, trying to do it correctly, as we'll see in the documents. They're trying to be fair, but they need to get involved in arguments that they know nothing about, and we'll see the exploitation of that fact. So when the Baal Shem Tov in the time of the Baal Shem Tov lived in Poland, as did the Maggid, the Mizritcher Maggid, his main disciple, and the two leaders of Chassidus. By the time the Alter Rebbe becomes Rebbe, he's still living in Poland. However, he's not living in Poland. He's living in the country that's today Belarus, which in those days was part of Poland, although by that time Russia was already beginning to expand its territory. As the famous joke, they asked the Russian border at the time was switching. Every few months, they extended the border, then they minimized it. The border kept changing. At one point, the border fell right in the house of a Yid, an old Russian Yid, fell right in the middle of his house. So they asked him, which side of the border would he like to be? Would he like to be part of Poland? Would he like to be part of Russia? So he says he wants to be part of Poland. So the Russians got all sakra, all insulted. They're part of Mother Russia. You want to leave Russia and go into Poland? He said, why? He says, listen, I can't take another Russian winter. Enough. I want to be in Poland this time. So this was what was happening at the time. Now, the Chassidus begins, and the chief opponent to Chassidus, as we know, to the ideology of Chassidus, was the Vilna Gaon. Rebbe Eliyahu Vilna, ironically known as Rebbe Eliyahu Chassid, a big Mekubal, a big Talmud Chacham, and he was the one that was very strongly against Chassidus. However, he was in his ideology was very he was a very strong in his ideology, but he wasn't an extremist in there was limits to what he would allow. So for example, there was a big discussion if they should make a cherem, if they should excommunicate the Chassidim. The Vilna Gaon allowed them to make a cherem on Chassidim. But if part of a cherem is to give malchus, for example, if somebody doesn't listen to the cherem, so if they say you can't come within Dalad Amas of a chassid, or you can't say Shalom Aleichem to a chassid, the cherem, often a cherem would allow that if you do say Shalom Aleichem to a chassid, then you'll get malchus, you'll get lashes. The community can give you lashes. At this point, the Vilna Gaon would not allow that, for example. So just to put things into perspective, he was adamantly against Chassidus. He was adamantly against Chassidim. He put them all into Cherem, but there was limits to what he was allowed to do. Some of the things the Masnagdim did in his name already at the time, they didn't even do it. He didn't know about it. What he did know about, he kept things kind of in balance. But on Yud Tes Tishrei, in the year Tov Kuf Nun Ches, which is Mid Cholamoyed Sukkos, in 1797, he passes away. And at that point, the leadership, the lay leaders in the way in the community, the kind of the big shots in the community, in the Misnagdim's community, are leaderless. They don't have leaders, and what they do is they can now really they try to utilize the opportunity to do whatever they want. And this is and they go out of control. So the first thing they do is what happened was like this. He was nifter Cholamoid, so he passed away Cholamoid Sukkos. Chol Hamoed Sukkos by night is Simchas Beis HaShe'eva. So the Chassidim got together in Vilna after the Levaya, after everything. The Chassidim got together in Vilna and they made a Farbrengen. And by the Farbrengen, they danced. It was Sukkos. It was Chol Hamoed Sukkos. Even the people that sat Shiva for the Vilna Gaon weren't allowed to mourn. The Misnagdim, the leaders in the community took it to mean, they utilized that opportunity to say the Chassidim were dancing by the Levaya of the Gaon, and they were Mavad, they embarrassed the Gaon, they were Mavadza the Gaon, we must do something about this, and the next day they reinstated the Chayrim, but they hit where it hurts. They reinstated the Chayrim and they added a few points. Number one, they hit the business of the leader of the Chassidim. The leader of the Chassidim, his name was Rebbe ben Rafal. He was a famous chassid known as Rebbe Rafals. He was involved in the community, in the leadership in the community until then. Until they found out that he was a chassid, he was involved in the leadership of the community. A very powerful person. His money came, his main business was that he sold wine to the Jewish community. It's a very big Jewish community, and he was the sole importer of wine. It was his business, and they made a rule that you cannot buy wine anymore from the Chassidim. So they hit the business to an impossible extent. There was only 30 Chassidim in the whole Vilna. So it's not like he can only sell wine to the Chassidim. He won't be able to eat that way. So they hit his business very, very strongly. The second thing they did was they said that the Chassidim are not allowed to have their own minyan. So the next morning, when the Chassidim went to daven in the house they closed the shul of the Chassidim, and the Chassidim went to daven in the house, actually in a basement they went to daven in the basement of one of the Chassidim. So the Misnagdim, because it was a Chayrim, they gave Malkus, they took the owner of the house, the person whose house it was in, the host, and they gave him 39 Malkus, 39 lashes with a whip in front of shul, that they on Chol Hamoed Sukkos. Then they ransacked the home of the mashpia kind of, the Rav of the Chassidim in Vilna. They ransacked his home. They destroyed everything. They sent his wife and children out into the cold. It was crazy. And the problem was they were getting out of control, and there was no way to limit them. So the Chassidim, for the lack of a choice, they had to get the local authority. They had to call the police. The problem was that the local police, you know the way it was in Russia or whatever, even in Poland, that they had connections with the local authorities, and they couldn't trust the local mayor to deal with the problem. So they had to appeal higher, and they appealed to the local governor. The local governor lived in Vitebsk. They had to appeal to the local governor to get involved. The local governor does get involved, and he opens a semi-investigation to what's going on, but he puts a rule that they must be allowed to have their own shul. This all happens over Sukkot. So you have the situation, the Gaon passing away. So therefore, any semblance of control over the extremists, the people that just fight, they would fight anything. They like fighting. So any sort of control over the extremists falls away. The local authorities have to get involved. And that's what happens over Sukkot. And it's kind of a stalemate. On Rosh, here's where we're going to start on the 8th of May. In 1798, which is Dalet Sivan, the local governor gets a letter. Here's the letter in Russian from a fellow by the name of Hirsch ben David. The guy signs his name. If you can see over here, he signs his name Tzvi Hirsch Davidovich. And over here it says Hirsch ben David. He gets a letter from Hirsch ben David saying that in White Russia, in the town of Lyozhne, there's a fellow by the name of Rabbi Zalman ben Baruch. He has gathered. This is what it's an anonymous tip, kind of. He has gathered a group of youngsters, and they don't live under the laws. They live in their own. Yeah.
Just for sake of, what's the geographic distance or proximity of Lyozhne to Vilna?
It's not far. It's not far. It's a couple of 100 kilometers. It's in the same country. It's not in the same country actually, because now it's not in the same country. But they were both. But it's not. There was no border. Kind of. It's not a. It's a couple of 100 kilometers, and it's under the same governorship. It's kind of the same state. It had the same capital. If that answered the question. They were both under the Russia was divided in a way similar. It's still today the same way, but it was at the time divided very similar to the way America is, where you have states, and each state has its own, just because they couldn't keep control of such a large area. So each state has to keep control of its own, so they had their own governor. The governor was in charge of his area, and he was answerable, not like in America where there's any sort of separation. He was answerable everything to the Tsar, but you still had that area. So Lyozhne and Vilna have the same governor. That's what's going on over here. Anyway, the Russians are very concerned at the time that they are going to. They were very concerned of the French Revolution, and he writes that these are people, they believe in freedom for everybody, and they're following the French Revolution in the hope that they're going to be able to go to Eretz Yisrael one day. And they're already now living in they do nothing all day, and they steal from each other. They bribe. They work with bribes. And he says like this: my children. And so you have over here this Zalman ben Baruch, the Alter Rebbe. He is living. He kind of has a whole group of people that are doing nothing, waiting to be able to get freedom. My own children, he says, stole from me 10,000 ruble, and they gave it to the Zalman Baruch, to the Alter Rebbe. And I can't do anything of them because I can't investigate anything because they're giving bribes to the local authorities to hide who they are. So he comes even with solutions, this fellow. He says, the only thing I could suggest to you is to send these 30 families, to send them to the front, or perhaps to send them to Siberia and let them live out their lives over there, in their euphoric lives over there, basically, and die out. That's how he put it. That's how he puts it. And he says, I'm putting this all into deposition. I'm swearing that this is all true. And here I am, signed Hirsch ben David. He sends this to a individual by the name of Lupuchin. Lupuchin was the local governor. Lupuchin gets this letter. 2 days later, on the 10th of May, he gets another letter dated 2 days later, the 10th of May, 1798, which it works out to Vav Sivan. Vav Sivan is the first day of Shavuos. The same fellow claiming to be Jewish, Hirsch ben David, starts saying, don't rely on the local authorities because they're all, I just want to tell you, there's a whole bunch of corruption going on in Vilna. And I'm bringing to your attention all this corruption going on. Again, he signs his name Hirsch ben David. Lupuchin doesn't know what to do. He gets these two affidavits that a guy is claiming, seemingly credibly, that this is what's going on. There's a whole bunch of corruption. There's also this whole new group of Jewish people that are living, that are waiting. They're waiting to get into. It's like they've created a new religion, and they're waiting to get to Eretz Yisrael, and they're waiting to overthrow the government. He has this whole thing, and you see, Lupuchin doesn't know what to do. So the first thing he does is he writes to the local governor in Vilna, and he asks the local governor to look into it. About 2 weeks later, the local governor comes back and he says it's a forgery. The reason it's a forgery is because there's nobody called Hirsch ben David. There is no Hirsch Davidovich, whatever he signs his name. There's no such guy. I've looked the entire Vilna. I've looked through the roll of the list of people that live here. There is no such person. Number one. Number two, he says if he's Jewish, he wouldn't have written a letter on Shavuos. So it's proof that this is a forgery. Nevertheless, you're dealing over here with an anonymous, so they know it's an anonymous tip. But nevertheless, they're dealing with an anonymous tip about somebody that wants to rebel at some point. They're waiting their time to be able to join the French Revolution and create freedom for themselves. The governor cannot ignore this because in the 1% chance that it's going to be correct, and he ignored the tip, he's going to be in serious trouble. So he has to report on this. He reports on this to the Tsar. Now, we're limited on time. His preliminary idea of what Chassidus is to the Tsar is interesting. Doesn't really help us much because most of it is wrong, but it's interesting. The Tsar tells them, open an investigation, arrest everybody that you think, interrogate them, and we'll figure out the next step. They arrest the Alter Rebbe. They arrest 20 Chassidim in Vilna, 7 of which they sent to St. Petersburg. The reason they had to send these people to St. Petersburg is that is where the main investigations could happen. The people that understand things, that's where they are. The rest of the Chassidim, they leave in Vilna in jail. And they take the Alter Rebbe from Liozna, and they arrest the Alter Rebbe, and they take him also to St. Petersburg, to the Peter Paul Fortress, Petrov Alas Krepos, known in Russian. Now, the Alter Rebbe, though he knows Russian, wants a translator. You can take from it what you would like. But they
No, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It's not a real.
Do we know if it came from a Jew? Do we have any assumption?
We don't know. We don't know it came from a Jew. The assumption it's written it came from a Jew because the guy claims he's Jewish.
So we have no clue whether the whole Malshinas happened from the Jews and the non-Jews. Is there any,
The Malshinas, but the assumption is the Malshinas came from a Misnagid under a fake name.
But there's no proof of that. It's just the assumption.
No proof of that, other than the fact that he signed a good Hebrew and that the Misnagdim joined. He signs his name in Lashon Kodesh. Yeah, if you look at the thing closely, he signs his name over here in script and think, yeah, whoever signed this was Jewish, no question, or knew a very, very good Hebrew. What's more important is Misnagdim, they played ball with all of it. That means the minute they began their investigation, the Misnagdim were fully involved. And as you'll see later, the Misnagdim were behind another few things. But I don't know if we'll get there, but in the whole story. So yes, you're right. We don't know who gave the original. It could have been a guy. We don't know who gave the original tip-off. We don't know.
There's the Malshinos of Avigdor, which was mainly the second time round, but I seem to recall that there's indication that Avigdor was involved first time round as well. No?
There's an argument between the historians if Avigdor was advising the first time around or not. There is no documented evidence that Avigdor has anything to do with it.
I did notice that in the responses of the Alter Rebbe from this one in 1798, that he addresses the question of hashbas melachim, of controlling the angels, and the only other place I saw that question come up was by David from Avigdor 2 years later. So that just made me think that there's a connection.
Bar 11 has a few other reasons why there's a connection. That Avigdor was the person. Bar 11 has a few other ones, and if you look in the Alter Rebbe Zigris, you'll see. If you look in the new chelik of the Alter Rebbe Zigris, where he's made the Mara Makoimis, you'll see that he has a few reasons why. But that's not.
Where is Bar 11's thing? All in the Igris? Is it printed anywhere else?
The new chelik, they have the Alter Rebbe Zigris in one volume, a new one, in the last 4 or 5 years. So it's in there. Anyway, what they do is they ask the Alter Rebbe preliminary questions. Fascinating questions, by the way, and very interesting answers. We know they asked the Alter Rebbe 22 questions. The Alter Rebbe was given advice what to answer them, but by the Baal Shem Tov, by the Magid. But they asked the Alter Rebbe 22 questions. But some of the questions the Alter Rebbe wants to answer in writing, and the Alter Rebbe spends 4 days. Ches, Tes, Yud, and Yud Aleph, Cheshvan. The Alter Rebbe spends writing these answers. He writes it in Lashon Kodesh. They then need to find a translator. The Alter Rebbe, at the bottom of this testimony, the Alter Rebbe makes a postscript, and he makes a request that after they find the translator, he should be able to read the translation before they send it in as evidence, because he says there's nuance, and we have to be very careful that the nuance is correct. In fact, the Misnagdim, they tried to bribe the translator the translator can't falsely translate it. He'll get into trouble. But he can translate something correctly, but change the meaning of it. And they tried to get him to do that. The Chassidim had a mole within the Misnagdim in Vilna, and he spoke to the translator, and the translator said he's not even considering it. It's not something he would do. What the Alter Rebbe, what they're accusing the Alter Rebbe of over here is a capital offense. And under no circumstances is he going to have anything to do with it. The point is that the Alter Rebbe is now explaining to non-Jews even. The Alter Rebbe is explaining to people what Chassidus is, and why is there hisnagdus, why is there opposition to Chassidus. And what the truth is, I've seen it, I've had it until now in Lashon Kodesh, If you have over here, you have in Lashon Kodesh. I came across this morning, Rabbi Rappaport sent me, but I got from somebody else also, the translation into English. So I thought we would go through a little bit of the text. If you have it, if we could go through it together like this in front of us. I'm going to focus only on a couple of things because we can't go through the whole thing. I'm going to focus on what's important for us today to get a perspective of what Chassidus is about. So he begins, Al Rebbe begins just by saying that you've already investigated this. Nevertheless, I'd like to write what's going on over here. And Al Rebbe says here's point number one. The first 9 points are the main thing we want to focus on. What's called in Russian, I'm not sure why I translated it as prayer. What's called in Russian, he says Boga Militia, which is serving Hashem. Okay, what we call in Russian serving Hashem. The Jews split into two. The first is reading and studying of Tanakh, Talmud, Medrash, and the commentaries, and in addition to that, the halachic authorities that summarize and explain the halachas of the Gemara, of the Talmud. So the first thing of serving the Eibishter is learning Torah. We have hundreds of such books compiled over the generations, and these to however, to properly engage in such in study requires much wisdom. So the first thing of serving the Eibishter is learning Torah. The problem is that to learn Torah, you need to, in order to succeed, there's a lot you need to know. Remember, at this time, there's almost no such thing as yeshivas. Yeshivas are for a very select group of people. Most kids by the age of 11 had to be helping the family, had to be out on the farm, had to be helping the family business. There was almost nobody that had the luxury of being able to sit all day and learn. So when it comes to academics, how much time you have, it's not only how smart you are, it's also how much time you have, family circumstance. There's a lot that goes into being able to learn, okay? The second, and that distinction is going to become very important, that not everybody is able to know how to learn fully. It's going to become important in a minute. The second is davening. The second is prayer. Now, what's the benefit of davening? Davening has a plus, has a good thing, and has a challenge. Anyone fairly intelligent and literate, which, by the way, wasn't a given, literate was not a given in the 1800s in Russia, can properly engage in heartfelt prayer. Why? Because it's more or less a collection of verses and songs from Tehillim and from Nevi'im and Ksuvim. They praise Hashem. They talk about his abundant greatness, his rulership over the heavens and the earth, right? So mostly it's reading. If you know how to read Tehillim, if you know how to read the words, and you know basic translation, so anybody can daven. Continues to explain what davening is. It talks about how the Eibishter took us out of Mitzrayim, and that's why we love him so deeply. We love him so deeply, and we fear him, and we do the mitzvahs, and we want to do what is good and just in the eyes of the Eibishter and the eyes of man, to do good by everybody. And then he continues and especially to do well by the Tsar. And okay, so the point is that by what we're doing by davening, anybody could do. You need to know how to read, and you need to know basic translation. How to learn Gemara and how to extract from Gemara to paskin a halachic question, you need to have years of study. On the flip side, to know how to open a siddur, to daven and to translate, basically anybody can do. Okay, let's go to number two. Point number two. Now, the above mentioned davening, what's the purpose of davening? What's the point? It helps a man overcome his yetzer hara, his evil inclination. It helps him overcome the entire day. Why? Because even when done davening, because the memory of his prayers remains in his mind and his heart. If a person was truly inspired, inspiration doesn't leave in a moment. So if you were truly inspired, you will control yourself because you connected to God in the morning. You can control yourself until the afternoon when it comes time to connecting to God again. So it helps. That's why davening is important. So if the purpose of is Boga Militia, which is serving God. Serving God has two ways. There's two parts to it. Aleph is learning, is academic, is learning Torah. Besides the mitzvahs we're talking, obviously, Aleph is learning Torah. And second is davening. Davening has a long-term effect because it changes the way you act the whole day. So davening is also accessible to everybody. Anybody that knows how to read and translate basically can daven. On the other hand, one who does not engage in prayer, even if he studies halacha all day, the Talmud and the halacha all day, the Talmud and other books, it's possible that he will follow the halacha he studies, and it's possible he will not. And he may sometimes transgress God's commandments. If a person enjoys learning because of the academics, Everybody's sitting now listening to this. There's no mashkiach. Nobody's forcing us to be here. The reason we're doing it is because we enjoy it. What happens if you're I know a non-Jewish historian that studies Chassidism. He wrote a fascinating book recently about Jews in Poland, about Chassidic sects in Poland. He's not Jewish, but he enjoys the academic study. We could theoretically be sitting here, enjoying some interesting, getting to the bottom of what Chassidus is, Kislev, but it's not going to affect us in any serious way. Now, people that like learning halach and Gemara, if you like property laws, then you're going to enjoy. You'll enjoy Masechtas Baba Kama. Why not? And if you like learn damages, you can learn about Mitzia. You could learn things for the academics without it affecting you in your day-to-day life. So, in other words, what Rebbe is saying is, you don't need Yiras Shamayim in order to learn Torah. You don't need that. So, even if he doesn't transgress the halacha, it's still not right that he doesn't that he prays to God in the first person, saying, "Blessed are you." And he thinks about his business or other worldly matters. Yeah. So in other words, davening needs to be done. Davening is not about words. Davening is about a connection to the Eibishter, and therefore you need to be able to feel it. You can't talk to Eibishter, "Blessed are you," and worry what you're going to tell the bank in half an hour. Can't do it that way. Okay. The prayer is lengthy and written in a language not regularly spoken. So because even if we know the translation, it's not our mother tongue and it's not what we speak all day, which is why the mind wanders to think about outside matters. So the Alter Rebbe has established that learning is difficult. Learning is not achievable to everybody. To be a big Talmid Chacham is not what everybody's capable of. Davening is much more open. Davening does have a challenge though, because it has to be felt. It has to be emotional. It's much easier to spend an hour on academics than it is to spend an hour on emotion. So although it's accessible to everybody, it also has the flip side, which means you have to be in the mood of feeling. If you woke up in a bad mood, you can't feel, becomes much more difficult. I hope that's clear. So Alter Rebbe has made two things. Number one, he's explained that learning on the one hand it isn't open to everybody, but anybody that's interested in it, theoretically, if you have the time and the capability and you start young enough, you're able to, or don't have to start young enough. If you have the time and the capability to be able to focus on it, you could get it, but you need a much longer amount of time. But it's all academics, so all you need to do is enjoy academia. Versus davening, which anybody knows how to do. Everybody theoretically can do it, but it takes a certain amount of focus, emotional focus, which is sometimes much more difficult. Okay, now, in order to know how to daven, I'm going to skip this part out just because we're trying to get to the thing, but just to go through this quickly, the Alter Rebbe now explains, in order to know how to daven, you need somebody to teach you how to daven. How to develop emotion needs guidance. Just like how to learn needs originally at the beginning needs guidance. Once you know how to do it, you've got it. So too knowing how to daven needs guidance. With this, the Alter Rebbe, where we're not going to get to today due to the lack of time, but with this, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain why people travel to a Rebbe in this part. But that's point number 3. Okay, just the point is, the main point we have to know for this is that in order to know how to daven, you need to travel to somebody needs to teach you. Okay. Now, the ancient custom by Jews is to have in every city 2 large buildings for prayer. They had 2 things. Number 1 is a synagogue, and number 2 was a study hall. The synagogue, known as a Beis Knesset, was for the masses that work all day. Are mostly, at the time in Russia, they were mostly illiterate because they were brought up on a farm, they were brought up in a kerchman, they were brought up at a little, if they were lucky, they had a malamed. And then they had the study hall for the learned. They had a Beis Medrash called, not a Beis Knesset, a Beis Medrash. They learned to engage in heartfelt and lengthy prayer, each according to his intellectual and emotional capacity. For hundreds of years, this is what happened. Since the Churban of the first Beis HaMikdash, the working layman, the regular person worked. He davened in a Beis Knesset. He davened in a shul. He came, he davened, he left. There were select people that they sat, maybe not their whole lives, maybe until they were married for a certain amount of years, but they sat in a Beis Medrash, but there was no such thing as a Beis Medrash for learning. They sat in a Beis Medrash, they learned and they davened. They learned the whole day, and they also davened much longer than the Beis Knesset. The Beis Medrash person couldn't have a minyan in the Beis Knesset. They davened too quick. A person that went to shul, that came to the 7 o'clock minyan or the 6:30 minyan that was finished, the 6:30 minyan that was finished by 7:15, a person learning all day didn't daven like that. He davened, it took him 2 hours. This is since the Churban of the first Beis HaMikdash. In books written by a wise man 200 years ago, it's described how when they would pray at length for 2 or more hours each morning because of the lengthy meditations discussed above. You're talking here about printed book that 200 years ago is already talking about to the people of that generation that were doing this, and we know from the Mishnah how they sat long already. So what happened? Remember, the Misnagdim are saying that the one of the things in the investigation of the Misnagdim was, and let me just put this in over here, was that they were trying to claim that Chassidism is a new religion. Remember, they're trying to get the government to not like this. No government is getting involved in saying, I don't like this Rav, I want a different Rav. Yeah, I don't like this Rav, this yeshiva. They don't learn Masechtas Bava Metzia like everybody's learning this year. They learn, they learn Masechtas Brachas because they're learning the more halachic style. And I'm going to complain to the local government that they're not learning my style. The government's going to say, go jump at the lake, go to a different yeshiva. What do I care? If they want the government to be scared of something, to want to close this down, they need to scare the government. What they're trying to claim is it's a new religion. At the time in Russia, there was a religion that had started recently, at the time, about 50 years beforehand, a bit of a cultish, based off Christianity, cultish religion. It's also coming about 100 years after Shabbat Tzvi, and the government does know of breakaway. They are concerned of what breakaway Jewish sects could do to the people that created for the Ottomans, the Shabbat Tzvi. So they're trying to claim, now, how are they going to prove it's a different religion? They keep all the mitzvahs. So what are they going to do? So what they did was they highlighted davening. They daven for hours a day. It's unheard of. That's what Misnagdim claim to the authorities. Unheard of to daven for so many hours a day, number one. Number two is they move a lot by davening. If you've ever been to a Chassidish shtibel, people clap. And today they're talking about people from 250 years ago. They were much more spiritual than us. The Alter Rebbe, just use one example for myself. The Alter Rebbe would run around by davening so much from excitement that they had to pad the walls. He would run into the walls, and he would hurt himself. So they padded the walls, just so he shouldn't. The Alter Rebbe, when he was saying Chassidus, couldn't control his excitement. He would roll on the floor. When a person's this is what they amplify to the government. These people daven and they run around by davening, and it's different. So the Alter Rebbe explains that first of all, this idea of davening at length is not different. We're doing this for hundreds of years, thousands of years, 1,500 years. They were doing this earlier. It started really. Tefillah started like that properly after the Churban of the first Beis HaMikdash. Now the Alter Rebbe is going to say later, but okay. So what happened? So why is this new? Why do the Misnagdim not do this? Here the Alter Rebbe is going to explain in a very interesting, put it onto the political perspective, the current politics. However, later unworthy rabbis rose to power through buying and renting the rabbinate from local authorities for a price in all cities throughout Poland. Explains Alter Rebbe like this. If you recall, we explained that the Alter Rebbe says that always through Judaism we had davening, and you had people that davened and people that learned. The people that learned, they also davened. Sorry, you had the people that were the business people, the regular working people, didn't have time to daven the whole time. Or you had the ones that life circumstances caused that they weren't able to learn. They were illiterate. They came to shul, they davened, they left. You had a select group of people that were the learners. There was no such thing though as learning Torah without focusing on davening. It didn't happen. The Beis Medrash had the longer minyan was the minyan in the Beis Medrash. Then you had suddenly Rabbonim that came, and in Poland they became Rabbonim. They weren't hired as Rabbonim. What happened? These guys like learning. They like the academics. They want somebody to pay them to learn all day, basically. They enjoy it. They're not becoming a professor in university because they're Talmidei Chachamim. They're learning Gemara. They're learning Judaic studies. So what are they going to do? They were either themselves wealthy or they married into wealth, whatever the case was. They bribed, they paid the local government, the local governor, the local poritz, what it was called in Poland, the landlord. They paid him whatever it was. And he appointed this person as the Rav of town. So suddenly you have people, they're not the Rabbonim because they were hired by the community. They were Rabbonim, not because they were hired. He forced the community to hire them, but they weren't hired because the community wanted them. They were hired simply because they bribed their way in. They would get they wrote letters of recommendation to the local rabbis, giving them authority over the local Jews in all religious matters, and to judge financial matters between men, even though they were not properly well versed in halacha. So you had corrupt people that liked learning. They were not on the standard that they should have been at all, and they bribed their way into becoming the Rav of the community. Now, this guy doesn't want to learn. This guy doesn't want to daven. He doesn't like davening. Why should he wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning to be 6:30 by the minyan? He rolled into shul at 8, at 10. So it was forbidden to start prayers until the rabbi arrived in shul. It was also forbidden to learn shul or Beis Medrash, even if he arrived only at midday. But the problem was the locals were forced by the authorities to write the rabbi a letter of acceptance. They had to accept him as the Rav. So we have now a new phenomenon, a new problem. People that are rabbis of cities that don't have Yiras Shamayim. You don't have Yiras Shamayim, you could learn. No problem. You enjoy learning, you can learn. If you don't have Yiras Shamayim, you can't daven. If you don't care about God, you can't. You're not connecting to Him. You're not davening for Him, right? So they're not interested in davening. They stop davening. The problem is that the communities don't respect their Rav at all. So what were they supposed to do? You need the community to respect you. If the only thing that is forcing the community to have you hired is that the local governor put you in as Rav, what they'll do is organically they'll create their own thing, the community, right? They're going to stop. The Rav will sit in the front, but other than that, he's not going to have much say over communal matters. These government-appointed rabbis didn't want to burden themselves with heartfelt prayer, and so as not to be disgraced in the eyes of the public, they began belittling the virtue of prayer and exalting the virtue of studying Gemara, even during davening. And if you think this is an exaggeration, I can tell you, about 10 years ago, there was an individual trying to tell me that about a certain Rosh Yeshiva. He was telling me that the godless of this Rosh Yeshiva is that in the middle of Shemona Esrei, he'll take out a Gemara and look at a Tosfos. Go to the shelf, take out a Gemara and look at a Tosfos. And the fellow didn't understand. These people don't really exist, but this is from a few that still, he didn't understand why I didn't respect that, why I thought that was a bit out there. So what they would do is they would pray quickly without feeling and immediately rush to study the Gemara with their students in depth, with sharpness of mind, to demonstrate their intelligence and promote their reputation. So what happened was, what they did was they said, no, learning Torah, if you learn Tanya, then the Rebbe will tell you that learning Torah is the highest connection you can have to the Eibishter. So all you need to do is take that idea that learning Torah is the most important thing. If Shimon Bar Yochai didn't have to daven when he was learning, when he didn't have to daven, because he was when he was learning, he was on such a high level. So you have to take these types of examples and use that to say learning is the most important thing. Davening is unimportant. Davening is a waste of time. Get through it as quick as possible. It's one of these things that we have to do. It's one of these mitzvahs we have to do. The Chachamim said we have to do it, so we're going to do it. But let's get back to the Sefer. Let's get back to learning. And this is what they did. Now, what happens is, if a guy especially doesn't know how to learn a little bit, so they influenced and all the learned men who prayed in the Beis Medrash, in the studio, they were influenced by them to daven quickly and without feeling, either out of fear or flattery of the rabbi, because he was a ruler over the people. Whatever the case was, he was able to influence the entire community over a short period of time. He's able to convince them that davening is unimportant. So suddenly you have people that are learning and they're not davening. Only a few exceptional men in each generation engaged in lengthy and heartfelt prayer, what have been called since ancient times Chassidim. In the times of the Mishnah already, it's called Chassidim. But suddenly this became unpopular. Much more popular became learning. Why? Simply because of corruption. Because most community rabbis bought their way into becoming the Rav. And again, once something becomes popular, even the people that, you need one generation like this. The next generation, this is how they've been brought up. 20 years after this goes on, once it's going on for a certain amount of years, popular is the guy that wrote the Sefer, the guy that has a strong yeshiva. That's what's popular. And if the strong yeshiva means the people that are the sharpest students, not the biggest daveners, then automatically everybody that wants to have the best yeshiva goes straight to becoming the strongest learners. So it's a simple thing. Later, by the way, the Alter Rebbe is going to say this doesn't even have to do with eventually it's not corruption anymore. Eventually becomes laziness. If you don't want to daven, if you don't have enough, if you don't want to put yourself into being able to feel by davening, and there's another option, there's the option of learning without needing to daven, without having to daven, If that's also an option, then why wouldn't you take that option? For 1,500 years, davening, you want to be something that learns all day. You don't have a choice. You must daven with kavanah also. Yes, it's hard work. It's very hard to sit and learn all day because God said so. But that's what you had to do. Suddenly, there's a new option. Then the Alter Rebbe now goes, this is literally, he's explaining the history of things. This was until God's mercy was upon us. You have to remember, the Alter Rebbe is writing to the Tsar and his ministers. That's why the Alter Rebbe puts it like this, very strongly. And he awakened the royal spirit of the Russian empress, who conquered, who took over Poland when she put in a puppet master, to rule and expand her kingdom over all of Poland. And already before she appointed Poland's last king, the rabbi's power started slowly collapsing to the point that when Poland was divided, the power completely disintegrated. Especially in White Russia, where an awesome decree was issued called an ukas to validate the rabbis. The kid says, what happened was, until this all happened, the corruption wasn't in Russia, the corruption was in Poland. Russia took over Poland, it all fell apart, and the people of Russia were freed. And anyone in our country had permission and the opportunity to pray at length as he wanted, alone or in public in the study, which is the base medrash, or elsewhere. And no one in our country could protest. Suddenly, all the rabbonim of this notion of being a chief rabbi of a city, the Russians stopped it. So everybody could have their own rav. There was no chief rabbi of a city anymore at the time. So suddenly, you have like this. Until now, the only let's see this inside in point 8. This recent new awakening in our midst to engage in heartfelt prayer, again, because it's popular. It's not unpopular anymore. There's no Rav sitting there telling you, why are you wasting your time learning Tosfos? If you're davening, people will appreciate it. So in some cities, it's found in common among the youth of 25 years and younger. You can even see it by them because they rely on their parents. They rely on their parents for substance and have no worries and are still busy studying and are detached from mundane matters. So people that don't need to work, they could sit and they could daven all day. The older folks, however, because they're busy working, it's difficult for them to engage in heartfelt prayer and only do so on Shabbos and Yom Tov or during the week when they have time. But you still have, suddenly, davening is important. These youngsters, when praying with feeling, the youthful energy causes them to unintentionally make strange gestures. Here the Alter Rebbe is explaining why there's movements. Okay? But this causes them to unintentionally make strange gestures because when a person is with their hands and their feet, and this will happen even to a minority of the older folks. As for example, happens when one discusses mundane matters from the heart, he gestures with his hands or feet according to his nature. If you care about what you're saying, you get animated. And when these people are davening, they care about what they're saying, they feel it, so they're animated. For example, when one is angry or happy, he claps his hands. This is what's happening when one davens, only in a slightly different fashion. Then the Alter Rebbe tells you, this is also not a chiddush. David HaMelech says already in Nacha, David HaMelech made gestures by davening. Okay. Now the Alter Rebbe is going to tie it all in. So far he's explained that there's davening and there's learning, and he's explained why davening became unpopular and why now suddenly there's new davening. So now suddenly davening is back on the agenda because there's no leadership within the community saying davening is unimportant. Point number 9. It is known to members of all faiths that it's impossible for all the faithful to be equal in carefully keeping every aspect of the religion with the equal heart and soul. Everybody's on a different level. The same as with us. Even though the people were freed from the rabbis, even so, there are many people who are capable of engaging in heartfelt prayer, but don't want to do so, don't want to, due to laziness. Laziness is a very broad term. It's not necessarily even being critical. Laziness means I don't have to, because it is really a great bother and toil, even for the very learned men, than the toil and bother necessary for studying the Talmud. It's harder to feel emotionally. We all know this from our lives. It's harder to daven for an hour than it is to listen to a shir for an hour. And some are embarrassed to make the gestures necessary to push away outside thoughts. At that time, even the Alter Rebbe, this changed eventually. In Chabad, it was stopped to become encouraged using physical motions to generate emotion. But at the time, if it was felt that it was necessary and people were embarrassed, it's embarrassing to stand in shul when there's only 2 people clapping. Nachum Breslever, for example, says that when you have machshavas zoros, You should, if you can't, if something comes into your mind that you don't want to think about, you should clap. You should clap. It will take away you'll clap. It will take away the concept. Therefore, those who bother themselves, imagine you're the only two guys in shul that are clapping. You can't hear me? Leo, you can hear?
Is that from my computer or from his computer?
What he's doing nursery rhymes?
We can hear you fine. Eliyahu just has to fix
Switch
it.
to phone audio.
Therefore,
Chromecast. Like someone must have switched to Chromecast. HDMI 3 on the TV.
1 second. Mandy, I don't know if you can hear us, but we can. It's on all.
I can hear you very good.
Oh, now it's back on the computer. Okay, go back. You were saying that nowadays it's not encouraged to later
I
on.
was saying that nowadays the Alter Rebbe did change. The Mittel Rebbe did change. But I'll give you, for example, Reb Nachum Breslever said that when a person is in the middle of davening and he can't concentrate, suddenly he gets a machshava zora, he gets a thought that he starts thinking about the bank. This is the bank, what he's going to tell the bank. So how are you going to, in order to get your focus back, he gives a suggestion. So one example, for example, he gives a suggestion to clap. When you clap, you scare yourself back into reality. So the motion generates emotion. So this is just an example. But imagine this was encouraged even by Chabad, it was encouraged at this time. So imagine, but says Alter Rebbe, it could even be it's not laziness. But imagine you're the only guy in shul that wants to daven. There's only two people in shul that want to daven properly. But the problem is you don't want to look like an idiot and start clapping for no reason when nobody else is. So it could be they're simply embarrassed. These people are a bit more shy. Therefore, those who bother themselves to daven with feeling, young and old, are only a fraction of the total masses. Even though theoretically everybody can do it, it's very hard emotionally, and you need to have a certain courage when not everybody's doing it. You need to have a certain courage as well to do it. Therefore, the numbers are not so strong. There aren't that many people that do it, and the masses call them chassidim throughout Russia, Poland, and most of Lithuania. A term that originates in the early Chassidim who would pray with feeling as discussed above. Though today's Chassidim are not as great as the early ones. Chassidim are known with daveners. If you davened for a long time, you were known as a chassid. If you davened with kavanah, you were known as a chassid. That's exactly what we are. We are bringing back something that's only been missing about 200 years, which is the equal footing of davening and learning. There was no such thing as learning without davening. There was no such thing as learning without Yiras Shamayim. Finished. That's what it was. The Misnagdim in Vilna called the Chassidim Karliner, from the town of Karlin, based on the fact that right next to Vilna or very, very close to Vilna, is Karlin. The Rebbe Karliner was there, followed by the Shlomo Karliner. They were both eventually chased out of town by the Misnagdim. Rebbe Karliner was Mistalik, but Shlomo Karliner was eventually chased out of town. Rebbe Karliner's son, Rebbe Osher Stoliner, was also chased out of Karlin. And in Vilna, they called them the Karliner. They didn't want to call them Chassidim, because Chassidim is a complimentary term. They didn't want to call them Chassidim. So they called them the Karliner. The Alter Rebbe is just explaining over here, technically, why we're known as Karliner. We're not, says the Alter Rebbe. We're known as Chassidim. And the reason why we're known as Chassidim is because we're davening, is because we daven. This is more or less this first point. The Alter Rebbe now is going to go on and he's going to explain. I would encourage everybody to read this through. It's self-explanatory, all of this. The Alter Rebbe then going to explain why people travel to a Rebbe, where a Rebbe comes from, the fact that the Rebbe doesn't have to be a Rov of town, and why is there such animosity? Why is there such animosity? The Alter Rebbe explains, because there's jealousy any time when theoretically you could do something. Somebody else is doing something better than you. For example, until then, what's the Alter Rebbe explaining? Till then, who was the leadership? There was the only leaders in the community were those that had that were academically on that level. So it was kind of, there was an establishment. There was the intellectual establishment, the intellectual elite, the academic elite. They were at the pinnacle. Everybody else was nothing. Suddenly you have people that are not the academic elite. They're more emotional. They're able to daven at length. So first of all, the Rav isn't the only one, or the academic elite are not the only ones that are at the pinnacle. Somebody will. Until 3 weeks ago, this guy would be at the pinnacle. Suddenly, you see. Not only do you see that he's not at the pinnacle, which is one cause of jealousy, when somebody else when you have to share the crown. Not only that, you have over here people that are davening. You're in theory able to daven, you just don't want to. Whether you're lazy, whether whatever the case is, whether it's harder for you to tap into emotions, you're just more academic by nature, so it's harder for you to get there. And suddenly, you don't only have to share the crown. People say, "Hey, he has something that you don't have." This guy in the back of shul davening that is a 25-year-old schnook that until recently was nothing. He's davening, and you, the big Talmud Chacham, you're missing something. You're not such a davener. That's where jealousy comes from. When you trigger in somebody feelings of inferiority. So they got very jealous. And that's why there was misnagdim. That's less relevant to us at the moment. Why there was misnagdim, it doesn't exist anymore today almost, right? Why people were against Chassidus doesn't matter so much anymore. It's just for good for the context. But what is very important to us is what is important for us before we conclude is what is Chassidus. Our Rebbe over here explains Chassidus in a word. Chassidus is understanding of godliness and is Chassidus in one word is davening. Why is it one word? Davening. Well, let's put it this way: the practical application of Chassidus is davening. Chassidus is connecting to the Eibishter. Connecting in the Eibishter, you can get it through learning, and you can get it through davening, and you need to get it through both. But if you want to know the practical application of Yiras Shamayim, the Yiras Shamayim the Chassidus came to give us, the practical application is davening with kavanah. Thinking about what you're saying, thinking about who you're talking to, in front of whom you're standing, the words that you're saying, and that's what it is. With that I'm done. I just want to mention that the Rebbe is then going to go into a little bit Kabbalah, explaining what he does do, what he doesn't do, also some very interesting things. But that's already answering specific questions. But I believe that with this we've got to the basic, the one word answer of what is Chassidus. We've addressed that now by this. By these first points of the Alter Rebbe's answer. I hope if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. I should mention that Rabbi Rapport mentioned about Chav Kislev being the Hemshech of Yotas Kislev. So I should mention, and I'll share it. I'll share it because why not? May as well if I'm already. Where do we have it over here? So if you look over here at the, it's not here. I apologize. It's not. I don't have it here. Okay, forget it. But the Alter Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe was released from prison. The conclusion of the investigation comes to the Tsar. I'm not sure what day, but in Yotas Kislev, the Tsar says to release the Alter Rebbe. Listen to this. The conclusion. I want to mention very interesting. The conclusion was that there is that in the academics of Chassidus, in Chassidus Chabad, in the learning of Chassidus, he can't find anything wrong with it. That's what the investigator says. He does find there's a risk in the blind faith that Chassidim have in the Rebbe. However, he cannot see anything wrong with the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe is safe. So although theoretically there's a risk with this idea, there's nothing wrong with the Alter Rebbe himself. There's nothing wrong. I'm just going to point this out, something that I picked up on recently. And I'm not sure if I'm right in this. I'll just tell you this. But what seems to be is they pass in the Chassidus Chabad, this idea of learning Chassidus, understanding godliness, is 100% okay. What they didn't like was certain aspects of commitment to a Rebbe. 2 years later, the Alter Rebbe was rearrested, and most of that arrest is to do with the Rebbe, by the way. And at that same time, other Talmidim of the Mazid Shemagid were arrested as well. Other of the Alter Rebbe's friends arrested as well. And the psak at the end of that was that it's okay. It's an interesting, two different kapedas. It's interesting, but I'm going to leave that aside because I'm not sure if I'm correct in that, in my reading of the situation there, in my reading of the Ruchnistic thing comes out of it. But practically speaking, it says there's nothing wrong with the Alter Rebbe. The Tsar therefore says to release the Alter Rebbe, signs that on Yotas Kislev, the release document to sign on Chav Kislev. The Alter Rebbe was released from prison on Yotas just after Mincha, arrived, the Alter Rebbe first was taken to the house of Misnagid, the Alter Rebbe arrived in the house of the Chassid. The next morning, he had to go pick up the release documents, which is Chav Kislev. By Chassidim was always known, the Alter Rebbe was released from prison on Yotes, didn't get to the home of the Chassid, of his host, until Chav. What's interesting is that what would be the benefit of coming to the home of the Chassid? You see also this, the document was signed, the release document that the Alter Rebbe, that everything's okay, was signed on Chav, the next day, on the 17th of November, I believe it is. Remember, they're 10 days behind. I think that was before, now they're 11 days behind their calendar. But I believe that was still 10 days behind in those in 1700s. Anyway, if there's any other questions, I could just, otherwise, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much, Rabbi Itzinger.
And you're very lucky to have Rabbi Rapport by you.
Okay, thank you, Mendy. We'll be in touch.
Cool.